Oh. Okay, so today we are going to be converting our skirt slopers into a working pattern, and then we will be taking the front bodice, the bodices, and making sure everything goes together. We've got some interesting issues with the skirt, and we will talk about those and how we can fix them and how we might not need to fix them. It just depends. But let's start with what we have here. Okay, so we have the drape from last week. And so let's just start with the front for now. And what I've done is I just started with the straight line that we'd always start with. And I put this up against the line, and I estimated about where the hip line is, and I drew a straight line all the way across the draft. And what this is going to let us do, well, the correction, not the draft. So what this is going to let us do is get some sort of like starting and stopping point for us. Once we get the hip lined up, we can worry about the top and then the bottom from that point. Okay. So first things first, I need to put this on the hip. Now, if your hip is a little crooked like mine, which again, I was tracing very quickly, what you need to do is just try to go point right here to point. And that should fix it. But like if I did that point to point, I'm off up here. So I need to keep everything on that straight line and just move this to where it's at that point. And this looks like it's close enough to the line. I say close enough because it looks like it might, if I had just drawn this line a little bit up a little bit more, it would be exactly there. And that's okay, because remember, we have some wiggle room in the hip. Also, please ignore my hand. It's not dirty. I got some, I had a glove break on me in a dye bath. And so I looked like a zombie for a little while. Eventually, I'll have normal-ish skin. So I'm just going to put some push pins in here just to hold things down. Okay. And again, I'm just going to do what we normally would do. I'm going to trace it. Now, I already see a problem on this draft. I mean, so on the drape, so we'll cover that when we get to it. And again, just trace exactly as it is marked. Don't try to do anything fancy at this point because we're going to correct all this stuff. Okay. And we already have the hip, the hem, side seam, up, dart, dart. Yeah. Okay. Now, again, I am doing all of this in big black marker. So make it a point to not use marker. Make it a point to use pencil. So I'm going to draw this out exactly as it is drawn here. I'm not even going to try to correct anything. I'm just going to trace this out so you can see the actual trace out. And I bet you can tell me where the problem is already. Now remember, I'm not doing anything. This is exactly as it is drawn out. It's just you can't see the little dots. So the blue, this sort of baby blue, is pale aqua. I don't know if this has a name on it. Sometimes they name these, sometimes they don't. No. Okay, so this pale aqua color is the actual trace. So this is exactly what my drape looked like. Okay. So now we can clean stuff up. Now, let's sort of think about this for a second. When I was at the mannequin, I put a plumb line that allowed me to drape a straight line. Now, the problem is when I did that, I'm sort of at an angle in front of the mannequin for me, and I couldn't really get it straight. So I can tell that this came in a little too much here because it's angled in, and no skirt does that unless it's a specific shape, and that's not what this is. It'd be a peg shape or something like that, and that's not what this is supposed to be. So for me, I know this is wrong, but that was probably how I was standing in front of the mannequin, so you could see it on the camera. So I'm going to show you how to correct this. The other thing is this line is pretty much a straight line. And once we get to the back, I'm going to show you how we can sort of like get this evened up a little bit. So for now, what I'm doing is I'm just going to go over this in red now, just straightening up all the lines. We're going to correct the darts and get everything what we need to get. Then in black marker, I'll show you the finalized version of this. Okay. So for this, looking at the darts, we need to do the same thing we did on the back dart and clean all this stuff up. So for this, I'm just going to find like a midpoint here, and then I have these 2 points right here. So I'm just going to look and see what the difference is here. So it's about 1 inch there, and it's pretty much even money here. So I'm going to go ahead and just draw a line somewhere in the middle of these 2 points up here. So I've got this point and this point, and I'm just going to draw a line down. Alternately, I could draw a line from this point up. Pick one. You can do this with any dart, but it just doesn't really matter. You either do it up here or pick these 2 points down or pick this point up. Pick one. And you'll see in a little bit why that really doesn't, well, you won't actually see it. If you've taken flat one, you know these 2 darts can swing anywhere you want them to. So, what the heck, let's just do it from down here. It's easier probably. Probably what we did on the back. Okay, so I'm going to draw a straight line up. Now, the second dart, what we need to remember is that we don't want this dart too close to this edge. And the reason we don't want it too close to that edge is because if at that point it's going so far over here, you're only going to have a little bit of space left on the actual sloper. So when you are doing this second dart, it helps to move it a little bit away from the side seam. Now, my usual is about an inch and a half. So like 2 fingers at least, 3 fingers is better. So about 2 inches from this side seam right here is probably okay. Nothing, don't put a dart about 1.5 to 2 inches away from the edge. Now, the reason I say 1.5 to 2 inches or whatever is because sometimes that's just what works out better on a body. In this case, we're working with a mannequin, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to move this over. Now, my center of the dart would be somewhere over here. I'm going to move it even further over this way, not too much. Now, how close can you get this dart to this dart? No more than half the intake of the first dart. So my intake here, this measurement for the intake is 1 inch. So when I sew that, half of that intake is going to be from this point, well, roughly this point over. So go ahead and give yourself a little bit of extra room. So this dart can be anywhere near this dart as long as the space between it is at least half the difference of the intake of the first dart. Now, again, I like to make sure I don't want that intake overlapping at all. So I want to make sure that I have plenty of room. So I typically say half the intake plus half the intake minimum. So if this is 1 inch of my intake, half would be half, and then half again would be half. So just say, just in case, the intake away from this dart. Let me show you what that means. So my distance here is 1 inch. I'm going to make a mark at 1/2 inch. I'm going to make a mark at 1/2 inch. And then I'm going to draw this dart in from the waist to my point. Okay? So the red, well, red-orange, is now the corrected dart. So at least half the intake plus, like I said, another half the intake. I'm going to make a mark right there. Now, this dart also measures 1 inch. So I'm going to put my ruler here, make a mark at 1/2 inch, and make a mark at 1/2 inch. And now I have my 3 points marked for this dart. My center is right there. And I'm going to draw. Uh-oh, these two aren't the same length. What are we going to do? Not panic. We are going to mark this. Let me see if I can find the center of all those X's. Right here. Straight across. Now, I am only 1/8 of an inch away from that. Again, I'm not going to panic. Let's look at the length of this dart. 4 inches, that's fine. Remember I said you could have the front darts anywhere from 3.5 to 4 inches. So we're good to go. It's just like we did the back dart, except we have a couple of different things here. So straight down, here, here. So now we have 2 darts that are away from each other, at least half the distance of the intake of the first dart, plus again another 1/2 inch, because that's the intake. And then those 2 darts are lined up right there. Okay? Now, don't worry about this up here yet. We're not there. We'll get all that corrected in just a few minutes. Having said all of that, do you remember when we looked at the front? Uh-oh. My dart for the skirt is here. My dart for the bodice is here. Of the 2, which do you think is going to be easier to move? Well, I don't know if easier is the correct word. Which of these 2 do you think we should move? Well, I already told you. I think the first day we did this one. This dart's going to be easier to rotate than messing with these 2. Because these 2 have to be, well, within relative distance to one another, although we can consolidate and we can slide them around in flat pattern. But because I want this dart and this dart to be like somewhat clean and even. Once I've gotten these two drafted, I can probably easily just rotate this dart a little bit and get it perfect. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'll show you how to do that when we start correcting the bodice. So remember, the front dart on the bodice is probably easier to rotate than having to get these two like spaced out again and redraw them 20 times. It makes sense? So that corrects these two darts right here. So let's correct this curve on the side. Now it is a slight curve. It's not perfectly straight line. And you can see it right here. Trying to get this cleaned up. Okay. Okay, just cleaning that up. Now let's see here. Changing the angle here. Okay, so now that line's cleaned up. Let's look at the hem. We need a 90-degree angle. And I have a slight curve here, and that could just be where I drew it on the base of the mannequin. So what I want to make sure is I have a 90-degree angle right here. So I am going to use this point as my guide, although this is going to change in a few minutes, but I'll show you anyway. And I'm using my ruler as a 90-degree angle, and I'm cleaning up that line. Even though I know this is going to change in a few minutes, that's why I'm not really worried about this angle right here. I'm more interested in this one because this needs to be a 90-degree angle. Okay, and I'm not even going to worry about this right now just because I know I have to double check things on the bodice first, okay? Because this connects to the bodice, but we're not going to worry about the bodice just yet. I need to get these two working together first. Okay, so now let's switch to the back. Oh. Now I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to put this on that line, and I'm going to, yeah, same thing. It's just slightly down where I marked it. Like that's where the line is. So it's like 1/8 of an inch. I'm not going to cry about it. Again, this is draping, not pattern making. So you're always going to have those little just variances because the fabric that you want to double check and make sure you get close, but it doesn't necessarily have to be pinpoint perfect because, again, you're dealing with fabric, not lines and drawings and stuff. If this was a draft, we'd be in trouble. But this isn't a draft. This is nuanced fabric. Okay. And if you didn't get the back on the dart, I mean, if you didn't get the darts on the front, you're going to get them again on the back. Okay. Now, hold on, my little. Okay, there we go. Y'all still hear me? Yeah, okay. All right, so again, I'm going to use the baby blue marker to draw the actual trace. Regardless of what it is, as terrible as it is. Okay, so there's the actual trace. Now, let's clean up these darts while we're here. split the difference. Let's double check a measurement here because the front could be anywhere from 3.5 to 4 inches. Oops. The back can be anywhere from 5, well, roughly 5 to 6, really 5 to 5.5. If you have to push it to 6, it's fine. So let's use this measurement here. That looks pretty good, which is roughly a little bit past 5. Okay. Now, center here. Same thing. You want to at least have this 2 inches away. But remember what I told you. Before we start just like slapping these darts together, let's look at the back. So I put this over here at center back, and I sort of match it along the line here for the waist, and I lay it on top, making sure my center back is on center back. Now, this point right here, I corrected this dart already, and I'm happy with that dart placement. So I am going to use that dart placement as where my first dart leg should be. Let's look at that again. So I put center back against center back, and I match it. I'm walking it with my zombie thumb over to where this dart leg stops or starts, however you want to look at it. And I make a mark because when I sew this, I want both of these darts to line up perfectly. The intakes do not have to be the same, but I need the first dart leg to match. And what do I mean by the intakes don't have to be the same? Because when this gets sewn and pressed over to one side, what is it? It's just a seam. When this gets sewn and pressed over to one side, what is it? It's just a seam. So by having that dart point right there, I mean that leg start right there and that leg start right there at the exact same point, when they get sewn, you'll have a seam. Or actually, do more like this. Okay? So let's measure the original intake, which is 5 3/8. I'm sorry, 1 3/8. That'd be a huge dart. I'm looking at that 5 right there. And this one over here, oh, good. This is 1.5. Perfect. I'm glad that happened. So if I have 1 at 1 3/8 and 1 at 1.5, it's very easy to get them perfect. All you have to do is take, and I'm doing this on calculators in case you see me, 1.5 plus 1 and 1.375 equals 2 7/8. Divide that by 2 and you get by 2, and that equals 1 7/16. So each dart needs to be 1 7/16. Throw your head back and laugh if you honestly think I'm going to try to do the math on 1 7/16. What I'm going to do is take a line and I'm going to measure 1 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sixteenths. Get out my scissors. Cut. Oops. Cut the line exactly the length it needs to be. And I'm going to fold it in half. That is now half of my dart. So I'm going to put this here exactly on that mark. Put that right there. Mark this one over here. Now, what's my intake? About that much. So that's going to be, I have to have my next dart no less than this distance apart. However, look, if I take this any further over, I'm going to be running into that 2-inch rule over here. So what I need to do is just keep this around where this is. So I'm just going to move it. No, it's going to be fine. So I'm going to move it right there. I just gave it a little bit extra. See, like here is where that dart ends over here. So those are my 3 points right there for that first dart. This would be the intake in half. I'm giving it just a little bit more because if I gave it too much, I'd run into that 2-inch rule over here, and I don't want to do that. So now along this line, make a mark, and now I can move my darts or redraw them. So from this point, perpendicular down through the center of those numbers, straight line, straight line, straight line, this, straight down, straight line, straight line. Now we have 2 cleaned up darts on the back. Easy. Well, I just drew my line a little too long. Okay. Now let's clean up the rest of these lines. Let me get rid of some of this paper. Okay, now let's clean this line up. Sometimes I find it easier to get the shape going upside down than it is use it traditionally. Here, find that curve. Okay. Oops. So I just found this curve going this direction. Through that line. Okay. Now here, same thing. Don't worry about measurement yet. Don't worry about that at all. I'm just going to go from this point over. I'm going to make sure that I've got my ruler on those lines exactly where it needs to be. Okay. Because I want a 90-degree angle over here more than anything. Okay. Now, that is a cleaned up draft, but we have problems. Not big ones, but problems nonetheless. Well, here's the thing. Before I start correcting anything, I now need to match up what I've got going up here with my bodice, because that, before I can start attacking this side seam, which is the problem here, and you can see that I have an angle coming in here, but I have a slight angle here, a slight angle here. I have a curve in here, and I have a curve that's not that pronounced over here. So you see that I have like, the seam's probably correct. And if I left it on the mannequin, it would probably be fine. But I want to make sure everything is nice and neat and clean and even, just because that's what we have to do with a sloper. So now I'm going to go ahead and clean up this line up here. And this will give me a much nicer, smoother curve to work with as it relates to the bodice. I'm also going to, hold on. front, center back. I am also going to separate these two because it'll make this next job a lot easier. Okay, let me get out an old edition of the book and a mat. Now, in order to find this intake up here, like we did last time, I need to make a little box of something like that. We're going to fold the dart legs that are closest to center front or center back. It just depends on which piece you're working with. You're just folding that one dart leg exactly on the line as drawn. Okay, and crease it, really crease it. Now I'm going to take, if I can find an angle here, the bulk of the pattern and lay it off of the corner of a table, in this case a book, and I'm going to fold the dart over. Now for this example, I'm going to tape this, but I would never normally do this because I'm sort of like, I just want to tape it really quickly to get it to where it doesn't move around too much. Okay, same thing, fold this over, and I'm really creasing it up here. And I'm just going to tape it up here just to hold it in place. Okay. Now that I have my darts taped together, now I can form a clean line. You want to make sure that what you have here at center front is a 90-degree angle. It does not have to be a long 90-degree angle. It just needs to be a 90-degree angle. Oh, I don't know, half an inch or so away from center front. Now, I'm going to take my little tracing mat I have under here. And idealistically, that won't work. You will use a ruler for this. And I think, let's see, I might be able to get away with this one. Yeah. Kinda. Let me see. The Farragate might work better. Yeah, it always does, doesn't it? Okay. So what I'm doing here is I am finding a straightaway on the curve, if that makes sense, to put that right there. And I'm waiting for it to hit this point over here. Okay. And what that'll do is sort of like split the difference between everything and give me exactly the shape that I need. Now I cannot do this. There we go. So I'm just using my stiletto across this. And I'm getting that stilettoed line right there. Now, because I'm just going to leave these the way they are, that line is correct. Use your rulers for this, please. That's my new shape at the waist. But I also have to draw in my intakes. Oops. So that's my shape at the waist. Looks a little weird, but it might change in just a second. Also, that's probably a little too high. Let's see. The Whataburger colors here. Yeah, smooth enough. Let's see. We could probably find a smoother line. Let's see. Yeah, probably split the difference a little bit more. We'll leave it the way it is. We'll do this. We'll do the split the difference on the back better. Okay, and you'll see what I'm talking about in just a second. Okay, so same thing. Unfortunately, a lot of draping and pattern drafting and stuff like that, you can sort of like, once you do it 450 times, you sort of get it and it makes a lot more sense. Over the corner. And you can start looking at shapes and stuff like that and say, oh, that doesn't look right. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong. It's weird. Okay, so that's the back. And I'm going to take my ruler. Let's give us a 90-degree angle at center back. And again, this length might not be correct. I got to double check that in just a second. See, I'm going to need a deeper curve with this one. Okay, that works out better. Okay. Now, like I said earlier, there's no real like order of operations for this. You basically have to do all of this stuff anyway. So you can attack this however you need to attack it. If you want to do a, you want to do the bodice first before you do the side seams. There's no rule that says you don't have to or can't or whatever. You can do this however you need to do it. And again, I'm working with really chunky markers here. So let me get rid of some of this paper up here. And get rid of some of this paper down here. I need this space in a second. Clean up. Hold on. Okay. Smooth those back out. Okay, now let's double check our side seam measurements. So don't worry about anything else. Just look at the side seam. Okay, that's perfect. And I'm going from the hip up and the hip down. I've got a little bit of a jog up here, but that might just be how I'm looking at it because I'm not standing up. Normally I'd be like over this looking at it, but can't do that. So the bottom is perfect. Yeah, so this right here is just about 1/8 of an inch off. Gosh, I wouldn't even say that. It's like you can kind of see it. It's more like a 1/16 of an inch. So what I'm going to do is just come up a little bit here and blend. And now it is come down a little bit here. Okay. So like where those two meet right there. Perfect. And that's it. I mean, you don't have to do any more correcting than that. So that was from the hip up and then from the hip down. Don't worry about shape yet. We can correct that in a minute, which we're going to have to. All right. Now, the hard part. We've got to make sure this with the darts closed matches this with the darts closed. So we're going to start with the front. As we put this up here, you can see that what I'm doing is I'm matching center front right here. And I am going to walk this seam with my thumbnail as I twist it. Now, as I do this, again, this dart is not in the correct position. So I'm going to correct that Now, this is an easy fix, and I'm going to do this in hot pink. So right here, I'm going to make a mark on my sloper where that dart starts on the skirt and where it should be the bodice. Now, I'm also going to measure this intake. Sorry, measure this distance, which is a 1/2 inch. So from the dart leg that I had drafted over to where it needs to be is 1/2 inch. Go over here to the other dart leg and mark 1/2 inch away from where it was. Do you see how that just shifts the dart? Now, redraw your dart. The black line, the blue line no longer exist. Pink is the new corrected dart. Okay? Now, at this point you could, but we're not going to. We're going to do it after we do this, the top. At this point, you could do the intake here, but we're not going to worry about that right now. Okay? So for this, I'm just going to fill in this little gap right there with just a little piece, with just a little line. And that's all I'm going to do for this for right this second. Now, when I put this up and I match it to here and I walk the seam over, boom, that dart is exactly where that dart needs to be. Okay? Now, remember, the darts are nothing. There's nothing in the darts. So when we are counting a measurement here, we ignore the darts. So now I'm going to go all the way across to this leg over here, right there. And I'm going to skip all the intake of the first dart. And I'm going to match this dart leg to this dart leg. And I'm going to put it right there. Okay. Then I'm going to continue to walk this over. And I'm going to use a little bitty line. You probably can't even see it. It's just a little bitty line in a pale color that tells me that's where this next dart leg begins. Now I'm going to skip that intake right there. I'm going to skip it completely because the dart doesn't exist. I'm going to move this to that mark right there. And I'm going to continue walking this seam along. Now, you really can't tell, but I've got about 1/8 of an inch difference between these 2 points. So here is, oh, you can kind of see it here better. Oh yeah, that's probably better. I've got 1/8 of an inch jog in between these 2 points. Now, I know in just a little bit, the measure, we're going to change that in a second. So I know I'm going to have to change this side seam in a second because I need to make sure they're nice and even. But this tells me that I can move this in about 1/8 of an inch to match, or I can move it out about 1/8 of an inch to match. Okay. Having said that, keep this in mind for now, and then it'll make more sense in a second once we correct the side seam on the skirts. So you can see that we're kind of like bouncing around because we need to make sure everything sort of jives first. If all I'm off is 1/8 of an inch, we're fine. Because I can fix that in a heartbeat. Now let's look over here. Same thing, putting this at center front. I've already corrected this. So now I'm going to go over to this dart leg go over to this dart leg, take a little bit of light pen just to kind of give myself an indication, because that's this space in between right here. Then skip across to this dart leg over here and walk this over. And you can see over here, I have about, what's that, 3/8? Yeah, I've got about a 3/8 inch difference between, I've got about a 3/8 inch difference between these two seams. So that's something I have to deal with. However, that's not bad. That's not bad. Sometimes when you're doing these drapes and drafts, whew, you can have like 1/2 inch to 2 inches off, and it's not fun. So now let's look at this side seam. And we're going to talk about where you can and not necessarily cannot, but probably shouldn't correct. So I'm going to tape this down, and I'm taping this on the grid of my mat on a line. You can't see the line because it's covered by paper, but all I'm doing is putting this point right here on a line on my mat, and I'm going to tape it down. I'm going to make sure I'm lined up on this side. I'm going to tape that down. While I'm at it, I'm just going to put a piece of tape up here too. Now this is showing you how to correct all of this. Now I'm going to put this point, which is right here, the hip line, the hip point exactly on my hip point right there. And I'm going to line this other side up on that grid. And just because I don't have 50 hands here, I'm going to go ahead and tape this down as well. Now, it's down here. I'll regret this later, but that's okay. Now, you can see, hopefully, okay, you can see the differences between these two pieces, right? Like this one kicks in, this one's over here. Now, what I'm going to do is draw a straight line off of the hip, exactly on the hip. So this is going to be a straight line that is perpendicular to the hip. And I'm going to do this in a light color. Okay. Now that straight line, now we know the hip is an HBL and it goes around the body, right? So technically speaking, and this is where the difference between draping and drafting come in handy. I'm dealing with a relatively human body, an analog of a human body that has a seat, that has a little bit of a, well, not much of a belly, but there is a bulge there. And so this drape, as it is draped, might fit that mannequin perfectly. If I were to take this and cut it up into muslin right now, put it on the mannequin, everything might be perfect. But the problem is, down here, I have a seam that is kicking in. And what that's doing is it's causing everything on this side, if this, think about it like a plaid or a stripe. If I were to join these two pieces together, what would happen is I would have a line, like if this is a stripe that does this, like straight across, I would have a line that slightly intersects it at an angle. And we don't want that. So you have one of two options here. Now, this is where we get the difference between technically draping and technically drafting and physicality. This is the main difference between draping and drafting, even though they're two sides of the same coin. Like I said, this works on the mannequin. This drape that I did works on the mannequin. I know it works. I just did it. I know it works perfectly fine. But according to the geometry of this, it doesn't. Because this line right here is pushing forward. And this line is slightly off of the back. So this is when it's really important that you understand that I'm going to make a correction right here just to show you exactly what it's supposed to look like. But it isn't necessarily going to fix the problem. It might actually cause more problems. But what we're going to do on Wednesday is we're going to look at this in fabric on the mannequin, and I'm going to show you how to get this absolutely perfect and correct once we've cleaned up all of our lines. Okay? So for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to split the difference on these two, and you have a couple of options. If you look at this space down here, and I say, let me see what y'all are seeing. And I say, the gap between them is a 1/2 inch. That's this line and this line. And then there's my little space in the middle. So if I were to put a mark at 1/4 inch here, and on this side, 1/4 inch here, and redrew this line to match these two exactly, I have split the difference below the hip. I haven't added anything to this. I've just split the difference to make sure that from the hip straight down would be even shape on both sides. So let's see. Take your hip ruler. Find a smooth curve from the hip, and I'm just putting this on the hip as much as I can, a straight line, until it touches that. And I'm going to do this in black, because black is going to be the final color. Okay. Now I'm going to turn this over, find that same curve, and draw it over there. Oh, whoops. Sorry. You can't see that on that. Hold on. Well, that's what it would look like on the other side. I'm going to do that in just a second. I can do it with my stiletto. So now, the back has that shape to it, and the front has that shape right there. So even though when I was on the mannequin, and again, I was at a weird angle trying to get that under that side seam corrected, using the plumb, this now corrects the sloper. Having said that, on a sloper, typically, it is a straight line from the hip down. So this would correct the pattern. The yellow line that I drew as my guideline would correct the sloper. So you have one of two options here. And again, it just depends on the mannequin you're working with. It depends on the shape you want to create. If I were to follow this line right here, it would be technically correct. But if I followed the straight yellow line, it would also be technically correct. However, by following the straight yellow line, I'm actually adding fabric to the mannequin, to the sloper. So it might not work the way I want it to on the mannequin. But technically speaking, that straight line would be correct. So you've got a couple of options here. And this is really overthinking it. All of this is really overthinking it because, again, this could all be completely academic. Once I do this in fabric, I'm going to do the yellow line just so I have some reference here. I'm going to do the yellow line, but when I get it on the mannequin, it might be completely wrong. But that's okay because I'm going to show you how to fix it if it isn't. Confusing? Shouldn't be. All we're doing is splitting the difference. So depending on, but again, all of this depends on the shape of your mannequin. So we're going to kill that. And we're going to kill that. Okay, you have options there. Now, above the hip line, same story. But you'll see that we have a straight line that's literally on this side and none on that side. So the difference here is between the original seam and that is 3/8, which is 3/16, I think, in half of that. So I'm going to take a little scrap of paper, measure it at 3/8 because I ain't doing math. Okay, so that little piece of paper is 3/8. I'm going to fold that in half. I am going to put 3/8 on that side. Let me mark that line. Okay. 3/8 on this side. And all I did was just mark that straight line on this piece of paper with the stiletto. Okay. So that's my new shape for the side seam. Now, the hip curve earns its name. Straight up. Move this down because I'm running out of space. Straight up from the hip. New side seam. Straight up from the hip. New side seam. And that's how you correct the side seam on any skirt, really. So if you wanted the skirt to be the actual fit, it would be the curved ones. If you wanted the skirt to be a sloper, it would be the straight ones. And up here, we need to correct that to make sure everything jives up top. Now, Here comes the part that can throw all that out the window. You can see that as you're doing this. Hold on, maybe I'll just tape up so I don't catch on anything. You can see that as you're doing this, there's a lot to think about. There are a lot of little places you have to worry about. There are a lot of things that you need to double check and make sure everything works together. But it's basically everything you already know. It's like, you know that if you have a seam here, it needs to connect to a seam here. And if it's off, split the difference and connect it. So let's go back to the bodice. Measure, measure. That's correct. Oops. Measure, measure. That's correct. Move that over. Over here, over here. Uh-oh. Now this, that yellow line, it's where my side seam is on the skirt. All right. On the back, let's do the same. Measure, that's okay. Close that gap, that's okay. Right there, that's okay. Move this over. Oops. Now, this one is way better. That's way closer to where that needed to be. So, looking at these two, you remember how I said when we draped the skirt front, I said we're going to correct these darts and then just move the front where we needed to. And I said over here, we're going to correct this dart on the back bodice and then just move this dart where we need it to. Right. So there was no specific saying, okay, we have to always use the front. We always have to use the bodice. We always have to use the skirt. It's whatever you want to do as long as your corrections are correct and you fall within all the guidelines. So, you know, little space over here, space over here. This center is parallel to center back. This dart can rotate anywhere, so it doesn't really matter. So we had options that told us where we could correct. Now, it's sort of everywhere. We just corrected the skirt, which needed to be corrected. We had to correct that at the top, so that's fine. And we corrected it below here, although I want you to consider the skirt above and below the hip, two different things. No problem. So we've corrected this, so this we know is correct. What have we not corrected yet? The side seams. Now, do you remember when I told you the side seam on the mannequin is just a suggestion? This proves it. This right here is always going to be at that one point, right? Because we know our armhole is perfect. We've done that correction already. So the one line on this entire thing that hasn't been changed at all is this right here. Why? Because we haven't needed to change it up until this point. If we didn't have a skirt sloper to deal with at all, and we were just doing a bodice sloper that was never going to connect to anything, we could leave this side seam wherever we wanted to. But here, we now have a problem. So, the next thing after I get, so when you look at all this stuff, like the numbers and the geometry all make sense. Like it's all correct. We haven't added anything to the waist. All we've done is sort of move things around. Here, we haven't added or taken away anything to the waist. All we've done is move stuff around. So the same thing happens here. All we're doing is sort of shifting that side seam where we need it to go. Now, on the back, it's not an issue because it's literally just the width of a marker. It's literally just a marker width. Whoops, where are we? Oh, here. It's literally just a marker width. So with this, I could just redraw this line a little thicker and it would be fixed and done. Here, we've got a little bit of an issue. from this, where are we? Oh, it's center front. Second, make sure this is all correct. Okay, so from here over, this paper, you can see what I'm talking about. There we go. Okay, so from here over, I have I have one of two options here. I can either split the difference here, meaning I'd have to move this seam that we just corrected over a little bit and move this over a little bit, like splitting the difference between here and here. I don't want to do that because what's going to happen is it's going to throw off the side seam below the waist. Option 2 is to draw from here to here. Now, what that will do is that will fit the waist, but it might throw off this over here. Now, on both of these, I have to come in. I don't have to go out on one and come in on the other. So splitting the difference that way isn't going to work. So at this point, you kind of have to just make a decision in what you want to do. What I'm going to do, and this is something, you can adjust if you need to. So here, if I don't want to, so like the waist measurement here is correct, right? Like this waist measurement, taking out all these darts here, here, and all, moving this over here. I'm still about, what's that, 3/8? Yeah, I'm about 3/8 of an inch off. So if I were to redraw this line from here to here, I would be 3/8 of an inch off on this measurement for the front. I'd be killing meaning I'd be losing 3/8 of an inch on the bodice at the waist, but not really because it'll fit. Now, let me ask you, where on the bodice do you think we could compensate for that 3/8? Right here. So, again, we've got plenty of options. I were to close this up, move this over here. I could leave the side seam where it is, meaning don't even touch it. If I decrease the dart by this difference, which in this case would be 3/8 of an inch. So let's test that. Make sure my math works correctly. If I were to come in and mark 3/8 of an inch right there, okay, so I got a little mark right there, which is not close to the original one, not too far either. Put that there. Then I mark this right here, move this over. Oh, I'm sorry. I did that wrong. I meant increase that. Whew, I'm like, wait a minute, what's wrong? Sorry. I did that. Sorry. I'm like, what's going on? My energy drink isn't working. Okay, so go over here, close the dart to that 3/8 inch extra. Can mark right there. Move that. Now, that is at the exact spot of that side seam. So you see how now you have several options to work with. Which one's correct? I don't know. It all depends on how this works on your mannequin. It all depends on the shape you want for your fit. For me, I'm going to make a new dart leg, which is just going to be adding to this dart. Should be adding to, not taking away. Should be adding to this dart right here. If you take away from the dart, you actually add to the outside. That's not what we're going to do. So I'm going to just leave this side seam where it is. You could also split the difference a little bit here too. So you have another option where, like, instead of saying, okay, I'm not going to use this entire distance, which is probably what that's what we'll do. So I've got 3/8 of an inch right here. So I'm going to measure 3/8 of an inch. I'm going to fold that in half. And I'm going to split the difference a little bit. I'm going to make a mark right there. So that will be my new side seam. And then here, I'm going to make a mark right there. And that will be my new dart leg. And all I've done is sort of split the difference here. So I'll be changing this line a little bit, and I'll be changing this line a little bit. That way I don't dump it all into one spot here or dump it all into one spot here. Another option. Again, all of this is completely academic depending on how it works on the body. And I'm going to show you how academic this can be once we get this into a sloper. I mean, in fabric. I'm going to cut this in muslin. So, just in case you didn't think you had enough options. My new corrected bodice here. Pull this out a little bit so you can see. Let's do this. Here, all the way up. Sorry. Here, all the way up. Neck, shoulder, armhole, new side seam to here. Sorry. New side seam, arc to here. Skirt front, straight down. There we go. Here, following along, new side seam, hip, straight line down, straight across, up. Back bodice is completely unscathed. It came out blemishless. I'm just going to fix this. Now, you could do the same thing if you wanted to here. You could start to take a little bit here, a little bit there. You know what? This is so close to that edge. I'm not going to worry about it at all. Boom. Problem solved. What's your margin of error? About 1/8 of an inch, which a lot of people would say is a lot, but in pattern making, it's even less. So here, up, 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 down, over here, over here, over here. Done deal. Back. Center back, here, straight, new curve, up, up, up. Okay? That's it. That is a, well, for now, corrected sloper. So the next thing I'm going to do, because I'm still working on this, I'm going to turn this into a working pattern. Now, again, I don't care if this fits anybody because it's just the sample for this class. But at this point, what I would do is I would lay paper over this. And, well, let me just show you. Okay, so with this, I'm just going to tape this down. I guess at one point I should probably teach you how to do this stuff, right? Okay, I'm going to tape this down to the mat. I'm going to take a piece of paper. Hopefully I have enough. I'm going to line up the numbers on the line. You can even start with a straight line, should you choose to. You start with a straight line. You line this up at center front. Take a couple of push pins, and you have a couple of options with this too. You can either use your stiletto, or you can use, I'm just going to draw this out with marker. I typically don't stiletto this anymore. I used to, because that's what the pattern maker and me was supposed to do. Now what I do is I just use, I use a pencil, and I get my ruler out and stuff like that. And I start with all the straight lines. And I'm just going to trace out all the marks that need to be kept. So get your rulers out. Don't do this freehand like I'm doing it. Make sure you get your rulers out. Oh boy. Just a second. Serious, I'm getting... Okay. Now, that would be a lift of this sloper. So now what I could do is take this, I'm going to add seam allowance to it. So because I want to make sure everything's where it needs to be, I'm actually going to add seam allowance to center front, because I need to have something definitive to line it up on. You could just cut this on fold and draw a line down there, but I'm going to do a seam just because I'm a masochist. Now, normally you do regular seam allowance on this. In this case, you really should do more seam allowance than you think you need. I'm going to probably tape some paper to this because I ran out of paper over here. I'm going to probably give everything, well, for me, big would be 1/2 inch. I'm going to give everything 1/2 inch seam allowance, but really your side seams and your shoulder and, well, not so much your waist, but your side seams and your shoulder should really be 1 inch, because you don't know how much you're going to need to pull in. In fact, I'm probably going to do this to add 1 inch to the side seam on this. Now, for me, I'm not going to bother tracing this off. I'm just going to add seam allowance to my actual draft. Because again, I don't really care if this fits anyone. I really don't, because it's just a sample for class, but I'm going to show you how to do this rather than have one more step of me doing all this. And then once we make corrections, we have to take it back here anyway. So I'm just going to go ahead and add seam allowance to my draft, so you can see it immediately. But for this, you would add seam allowance to, again, if you wanted to, center front, it's not a problem, but you're not going to adjust center front all that much. So this is going to get 1/2 inch here. The neckline's going to get whatever you're comfortable using. I typically use 3/8 just because it's more production. Shoulder really should get 1 inch. Armhole, again, 3/8, 1/2 inch, what you're comfortable with. It doesn't really matter. We're going to pretend this is correctly drafted. And side seam's going to get 1 inch, assuming I have enough paper down there. Okay. So 1 inch, 1 inch. I think technically you should do 1 inch down here, but I think it gets really bulky down here. Okay. Now, the one thing we haven't covered yet is this dart as far as intake is concerned. You have one of two options. With a dart this big, I would do seam allowance. I would not do intake on this. It's just too big. It's way too big. So for this, you're just going to have the same seam allowance that you normally would, 1/2 inch, whatever you're comfortable doing. I use 3/8 just because that's what I use. Okay. So it would look something, hold on. It looks something like that. Assuming you had more paper here, because I ran out of paper right there, just because I'm going to toss this. So 1/2 inch seam allowance everywhere, side seam, and what's it called? Side seam and shoulder are 1 inch, because you might have to adjust those more. Although the shoulder might be okay on here, but we'll see. Make sure that when you do, if you're going to do this, to make sure that you do put a hole right through the bust point, just because this is a sloper, this isn't a pattern. So you're going to have a dot right there at the bust point, and really mark that on the sloper. That way you can get it back up on that. When you get it on the mannequin, it actually goes where it's supposed to go. So again, I'm going to do this in muslin to show you how to complete this process and how to make the corrections. So yeah, we'll do that on Wednesday. And that will wrap up the sloper project, thankfully. Now, let's talk a little bit about the sloper project. As far as getting a sloper correct, it is very, drafting it is in this. I was kind of helping somebody today with this. What the problem is that no matter how well a draft is done, no matter how clean these lines are, no matter how perfect our measurements are, no matter how absolutely immaculately well done this is on paper, it is completely useless until you get it on a human being and figure out the real issues. This draft does not take into consideration body fat. It doesn't take into consideration body shape. It doesn't take into consideration how the person breathes. It doesn't take into consideration if the person has a high hip or a sloped shoulder or any of that stuff. All it takes into consideration is, oh, here's 2 dimensions that now could be turned into 3 dimensions. So none of this matters until you put it on a human being. Now, we had the advantage of starting with a human being with the mannequin. So the mannequin is my customer. It's my body. It's perfect. I don't have to worry about it. So regardless of what my customer is or my mannequin is, as long as we've sort of cleaned up our lines and can go back and do all of our corrections now, it's fine. So at this point, this needs to be turned into muslin, put on a mannequin, and now the real work begins. And this is why I kind of reject the sloper system for draping, because I don't really think it works for draping. It works to get this to turn it into something. Again, that's what a sloper is for flat one. I think of the 2, drafting a sloper versus draping a sloper, I think draping a sloper gets you a better product for flat pattern. But again, I don't know. I think slopers have their place. I just don't. They're good for learning, but beyond that, I think you need to sort of like kind of drape most of the stuff you're gonna do. But that's a me opinion. Anyway, so yes, at this point, I'm gonna put this in. I'm gonna add seam allowance to all these pieces. I'm gonna turn this into fabric, and I'm gonna put it on the mannequin. Next week, we're gonna be at the mannequin, and I'm gonna show you how horrible this could possibly go. Hopefully I have a lot of issues with this. That way I can show you how to correct them. I promise nothing. Also, with this, again, just because we've done it once doesn't mean that we can't go back and redo it. So, you know. Oh, also, center back. Make sure you have an inch down center back, because that's where a lot of corrections can happen at center back on a sloper. Okay. But yeah, so on Wednesday, I will have this in muslin on the mannequin, and you will see how good or bad this looks. Okay, warts and all. We're going to take a look at it. That way, if you've made a huge mistake, like I'm sure I have somewhere rushing through this, you can still fix it. In fact, you're going to have to fix this on a body anyway. So, okay. So hang on to that thought, and on Wednesday, you'll watch a grown man cry. All right, I will see you Wednesday. If you have any questions, email me or send me a message through chat. If not, I will see you then. Bye.